My job is to go through all the options, all the way to the max, and then somehow even further.
Has that translated into your other work?
It was more organized. Let's make this part sound like a laser, you know. He's trying to find something that he's only heard in his mind.
It's a wall.
Yeah,
like
almost too much to even bear. So it's like, when it was done, it was insane sounding. It's an insane sounding record. It's a very unique sounding record.
Because it feels like the theme of this conversation when you, and from being around you, is I've been working with Stephan Hawkes for the past month on a documentary with the band Idola. But it feels like I've been working with him for years. Stephan Hawkes has an incredible knack for making artists and talent feel incredibly comfortable while exploring the artist's creative visions until they've hit their limit in the best ways possible. Stephan's career started in Portland, Oregon, making slamming records with Exotic Animal Petting Zoo, Chelsea Grin, Attila, and recently Dance Gavin Dance. Stephan has relocated to North Hollywood, California, and opened up a studio to continue producing both high-energy and intimate records. In this conversation, Stephan and I deep dive into his records with Vitriol, his methods with engineering, and his secret to getting the most out of talent in the studio. So without further ado, my conversation with Stephan Hawkes. So we are here with the beautiful Stephan Hawkes in North Hollywood, California. And I've been here for the last, I think, 2-3 weeks doing a documentary, but we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about your record with Kyle in Vitriol.
Yeah.
So from what I know on the record, it's a high energy slamming mix with the Fortin modded Marshalls. So can you tell me how that came about or why you ended up landing on that? Or
Kyle's crazy about guitar tone, always has been, always will be. And, I don't know exactly how their relationship started, but leading up to the recording, of their album, in like 2019, he had sent Mike Fortin an amp to be modded. And so I was just, told that would be coming, but, we were like obviously waiting down to the wire for it to show up. And then sure enough, I think we were setting up the tone with other amps at first. Actually, we literally did the first half of the first day. We were testing cabs with just stuff that I had at the studio, which obviously was a lot, but it wasn't, a Fortin modded thing. So we were just finding heads that he liked in case, whatever. Going through cabs, and I think partway through the midday, the shipment landed. Somebody went to FedEx or whatever and went and got it. And then we were it was basically like a mystery to us. So I've obviously heard, Fortin stuff, modeled stuff they've done, and obviously everybody knows the name. But I was very curious to be like, all right, well, we're talking about Kyle as a high thing, and I'm a Marshall guy. So he's like, he modded them. I had multiple 80s and 70s Marshalls. So I was like, well, let's, who knows what's going to show up when you mod something? You don't exactly know what you're getting. It's not like, So anyway, yeah, it showed up, and the thing, it was a JMP one. It was the Master Volume JMP. Was the first one he got for that album, and it showed up, and with a couple pedals in front of it, into the cabs that we were already kind of on the way to picking. It was just like, oh, good thing this showed up, and it was basically the whole sound of the record. So
nice. So when you were recording and engineering that A and B, was it like a clear one shot, like this is the tone, or?
It was just obviously the vehicle for the project. So it was just, it's I got to mess around with it a little bit. He left it at the studio for maybe a couple days or something after we were done doing guitars. And so I got to mess with it around, and it's its own thing. I got a lot of Marshall amps. I played a lot of amps. I got modded amps, lots of brands of amps. And it just does there's just an intensity to it that, and it had to be figured out. It wasn't like we just plugged it in and went done. I mean, now granted, it sounds real good, but nothing's ever that easy when you're making an extreme, ambitious album. So no one ever just plugs, maybe an AC30 you plug in, you go, good, we'll need that. But outside of that, if you're finding the guitar tone for an insane record that in this case, Kyle had basically made on and off over the course of 7 years, and had quite a 7 years in between when we had done, the first Vitriol 3-song basically kind of demo that we had done. And then he had quite a little journey that brought him back to, doing the stuff. So it was a big deal,
How long ago was that demo?
We tracked that in 2011, I think.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up remixing and remastering it a couple of years ago during 2021. And they put it out, and it was cool. He redid the vocals for it, which he did a great job on the vocals in 2011, but it was the first thing he had ever tracked vocally. So he had been in a band that had vocals, and he just played guitar, which, again, it's ridiculous to think that he sings and plays any of that stuff.
Yeah.
But in 2011, having never seen it, it was even more ridiculous. I just remember going, like, this guy is the best. Like, he's really going to do it. Like, he's, you know, there was no doubt to me that if he was going to do the vocals, that he was going to do the vocals and play the guitar. Like, it wasn't like some theoretical thing where like, now I got to go find a guitar player and I'm not going to do that. It was like, he clearly, so like, yeah, I mean, I remember when he hit me up about that, I was just like, if it was anybody but Kyle, maybe you'd think like, oh, maybe this is like a crash and burn deal, or like, oh, I hope we'll see how this goes. But I knew, just because it was Kyle, I was like, he's like the most determined dude on planet Earth. He's crazy like me. So I knew that he would come in prepared. And when we did those vocals, he did a great job. I mean, I was like, first time, he's matching the timing, he's matching diction, he's got tone, and he's specific about the tone that he wants. So when we redid the 2011, like the 3-song, demo or whatever EP, it was funny to hear, because then that was after we had done, To Bathe in the Throat of Cowardice. So, he was obviously, he toured and been doing it for years and years and years. And so it was like, we had these nice vocals that are better than like, most people are going to get. And then he just came in, many years later, 8 years later, and just, crushed them. And it wasn't even a slight on the way we had tracked them in 2011. The way we tracked them in 2011 was what he was trying to do then, but he had developed such a more unique, interesting, personal style that like, it's not the same thing as when you track vocals, like for somebody who's just like, I just want it to be good. It's like, good is not the point. I mean, good, it needs to also be good, but good is just assumed.
Yeah.
So it's more of an existential
level
thing of like, what is it supposed to be? There'll be takes that some people would be like, well, that was too kind of haggard, or that had a weird thing at the end. But it's like, but if you capture a voice break that you might think isn't cool, if it sounds cool, we might use it. And so we went from like that older, the younger mentality being like, we got to get all these doubled perfectly and your tone has to be, be solid and all that. To by the time we did it in 2021 or whenever we redid the vocals for those 3 songs, it was like, whatever's the craziest, zaniest thing, and it's got to have this, and very different objectives. The objectives had shifted a lot in the 10 years, and so it's obviously way cooler the way he did it.
I guess the point that I'm trying to make is when you met Kyle, that was like a rough 10 years difference.
It was more than that. I mean, yeah, I worked with Kyle for the first time in March of 2009.
Oh, okay.
March or April, it may have been April of 2009, doing a single for his band, Those Who Lie Beneath.
Because my question, I guess, is how did your, from the start demo to what you did in To Bathe, how did your engineering skills develop, and what develop that ear for that tone? Because that tone is...
Yeah. So if you listen to the tone on the demo, it's a Bogner... It's a Bogner Ecstasy that we had around the studio in those days. And that guitar tone, by the way, is really good. I don't know if you've listened to the 3-song, but like when I pulled it up, it was great. The thing is, just like with the vocals, great isn't even the point. Making something sound good and really, really good isn't necessarily the point of what Kyle was ever trying to do. And I've had this conversation with him, and we laugh about it. But it's like, we learned this stuff from each other together. Like, all these people that you work with, you're supposed to be picking up experience points and learning things from them. And when I met Kyle, he was like 19 and I was, 25 or 26 or something. And, I was probably I didn't fully understand, nor was I probably fully capable of delivering exactly what he wanted in his head. But he also wasn't necessarily capable of articulating it or creating it completely himself at that time. And so and again, I love how the Those Who Lie Beneath album came out. People mention it to me, regularly, and it's a great it's a really killer album. And given the circumstances of being there, like I'm very, very, very proud of it. But there were things he was telling me then that I wasn't able to fully understand. And there was things that he wanted that he probably wasn't fully able to articulate. You know, he wasn't able to get it through to me, and I was trying to make things sound a different thing. And so I think we both spent those. I mean, I spend every intervening year, not just the ones I'm away from Kyle or whatever, but like, I mean, I spend every year trying to understand how to do the job better, and not just better in terms of like making stuff sound better. It's like being able to how better to serve people's interests and how better to deliver on the things that they want, even if sometimes they don't fully know what they want. They do.
So in that sense, when he was like describing his tone or his vision for how he wanted his guitars to sound, did you solve those solutions by going with his suggestions? Like, I want to use this amp, or
yeah, and that's the thing that I learned, and I've just told him this. I've told him this many times, and he has taken this advice very, very well, which is why he's credited with producing the new Vitriol album, as he should be. Is that it's like I'm not. When he was 19-year-old kid and I was 25-year-old guy who was whatever, made a bunch of metal records up, I guess, up to that point, you know, it's easy to be like, all right, I got this or whatever. But like, no, I wasn't like I didn't listen to him then. I wasn't dismissive of what he wanted. I bent over backwards to give all those guys in that band everything everyone wanted. They all just wanted different things. So it was tricky. The label wouldn't want what I wanted. The band didn't want what the guys in the band had different views on it. And so that's what you realize. You realize that you need to take the lead. Again, this applies when someone knows what they want, when you can tell they have a vision and they know what they want. Part of being good isn't being like, I'm so good, I don't need you. That's a very, very young, naive producer's approach to producing a record, is like, they came to me, I've got all the answers. It's like, well, what if the answer is listening to them? You don't have that answer. You can't listen to them without listening to them. And so, and I've always been very collaborative making records. So I was never like a my way or the highway guy. I was never like, listen to me, kid, your record's going to sound like. I was never really that guy anyway, but there's a difference between having a philosophy of like serving the artist and then actually achieving what they want. Those aren't the same. Just because you want to or you're open to it doesn't mean you're going to do it. And so like Kyle had lots of big ideas, big ideas. And it was my responsibility at all phases of, because I engineered that whole album. So I engineered the drums, the bass, the guitars, and then the vocals as well. So like that was like every aspect of it. I was listening to him and basically trying to figure out how can I solve it so that Kyle is happy. That's all that matters, is that he needs to be happy. At the end of the day, that's
because he's the A1 client.
It's not just he's the A1 client. It's like it's his whole life. Like it's his entire journey has led to that. And that's the way I feel about most records. It's like it matters a lot. Whatever they're doing, every record matters to that degree. But with him, it's like he's obviously like he's got a more clear and a more difficult to achieve vision than your average band. He's doing something that's crazier, that's more ambitious, that's harder. And so that just meant that I had to, to do that. So like when we were getting the tones, it was like, well, I've got a billion guitar cabs. I've got a lot of heads. We had a whole pile of pedals, of boost pedals and overdrive pedals and fuzz pedals and crazy stuff that people had borrowed and brought and bought, stuff we, gotten from other studios. So it was like, my thing isn't to go, that sounds good, you should use that, just because I hear something that I like. My job is to go through all the options, see how watch what he's responding to. If I see something bring a smile to his face, I can't just sit there and go, well, I didn't like it. It's like, why did it bring a smile to his face? You immediately move past, I don't get why he liked that. It's like, that doesn't, then you're the one who's ignorant. Like, you're not understanding. So it's immediately, you see him smile, and even if it's a gross sound that you wouldn't have thought he would have liked or you wouldn't have thought was right, you immediately have to move to the next phase, which is, why did he make him smile, and how can I make him smile in the best possible way? So he's not saying I don't want something that sounds good. He's saying I want something that sounds like the best version of this filthy thing.
So what did you learn, like, from his experience, what his tastes were? Since I haven't interviewed
It's the most, it's just, he just wants it to be the most extreme. He just wants it to be the most extreme. It's pedal to the metal all the way to the max, and then somehow even further, which isn't easy. But
so he's looking for unique tones with high gain drive, really outstanding, something that he probably hasn't heard in a record.
He's trying to find something that he's only heard in his mind. So it's like, yeah, and you know, it's not that he didn't maybe have guitar references, but the guitar references that he would give me a lot of times, you know, they weren't one-to-one. It wasn't like, can you make my guitar tone sound like this? It was like, I like how something this is. So it was like he was giving me references that were like pieces of the puzzle.
What were those references?
I don't even remember specifically. I don't even remember specifically I think by the time we did Cowardice, we had moved kind of beyond even having references, but just over the years, you know, yeah, he had shown me stuff over the years, and I, you know, eventually I figured out what he wanted. Him and I have talked about it a bunch, so it feels weird saying it again, but like he had given me this reference to this band 1349.
Okay.
This song called Hellfire in 2009. And it just sounded insane to me. He's like, to me, it just sounded like a really scratchy demo. Some kid had plugged in a Zoom 505 into a 4-track. I mean, it wasn't.
I mean, culturally, that's what that sound of that music.
Sure.
was.
But in 2009, I was like, you know, when he shows me that, I mean, go listen to that record. It's not like, you're not just going to go, oh, that's the thing. Like, it's really out of left field, and it's really bizarre. And he wasn't saying he wanted the fidelity of his record to be that demo-y. He was saying, I want the experience of when this thing hits you, and I want guitars that are shredding and visceral and just almost too much to even bear. So it's like, after we finished the master on Cowardice, I remember realizing, I was like, oh, we did it. Like, this was what he wanted all along. And he was heavily involved in the mastering of that album. He was there for 3 days. We spent 3 attended mastering days, not mixing days. Because I didn't mix the record. So I engineered it, and I went on tour, and then he mixed it, and then I mastered it with him. And like, it was 3 intense days of being like, okay, this is if I do this. And then he'd kind of, you know, it was like I was being the hands of Kyle. No, all the tricks that I know how to do, I can show him this or this. And we do that 1,000,000 times, and he'd take it out to the car. And then when there was no knob to turn, when there was no 0.1 dB, you know, I was like, he'd say something. I'd be like, well, I got 2 ways I might be able to solve that. I got this way, and he'd listen. And I got this way, and he'd listen. And if one of the ways was better, we'd go with that. And then we just went and we went and we went. And so when it was done, it was insane sounding. It's an insane sounding record. It's a very unique sounding record. And it was like a 1349 Hellfire that wasn't recorded, you know, wasn't a demo. It sounded like it had that quality. Not all of the things, but like the guitars, it was like, yeah. And so I remember having that chat with him or whatever, and it was just sort of like a funny kind of full circle moment. And that's the point, is that in 2009 I wish I would have been able to figure that out. I don't know that it would have even applied to what he was doing, because again, there were other people in the band that wanted very different stuff, so I had to make a cohesive record.
So I guess in the studio, like, I've been in the studio with you for, I guess, 3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks. Yeah.
And you try an experiment, you grab different guitars, you're turning pedals on and off. Was the experience with Kyle the same, or was it like, this is the one?
No. Yeah, because the record is made of layers of different guitar pedals. So it wasn't just one thing, and then we print the guitars for the record. There would be stacks of pedals. Sometimes we would only use one. Other times there'd be 2. Or it would need an adjustment on the pedal in order to work for certain parts. So there was like,
do you remember the chains? It doesn't.
Yeah, it was like a lone wolf audio. I have photos of all of it. But basically there was like, there was a boost. There was a more fuzz element that was more like a zany version of the boost. And then there was literally like a nuclear, just like literally just completely quack, just like Donald Duck.
Like a lot of gain.
Yeah. And so we got this just insane. It was just explosions, dude. It's just sound. It's just explosions. And so what we did was we reamped the guitars. We did a whole reamp pass of just that on all the time. And then we blended it against the other guitars. And then we had parts where it would become much louder. So the main guitars would turn down. So we would adjust the levels. And you can hear it if you listen to that record and if you listen to the new record.
Yeah, I listened to both records on the way up here.
Yeah.
And I realized that from part to part, things develop in intensity. Like when things are getting chaotic, the guitar tone, it blends in a way that the energy of like what the drummer is articulating or it's getting out of the way of the vocal. Like I can hear that happening, but when the guitar is by itself, it's a wall.
Yeah.
Like it's insane.
Yeah. And so that's the whole thing. It's like, it's funny. You go, oh, it's a guitar record. So it's super important. These guitars rule. It's like, but ultimately he wants the guitars to sound right for each part. So those parts where the guitars almost turn into like shreddy, like laser beams, like that's because that's what's going on. There's a part, it's like he's not just arbitrarily going, let's make this part sound like a laser. It's like.
So I guess from my assumption, from what I heard on the records, were you doing kind of like what I assumed, where you're like writing that and getting that in and out of the way of certain parts and using that as an accent boost?
Yeah. We were just basically doing it in the mix, just having sections. So this will be that section. This will be a laser crazy section. And then we would have amounts, but they wouldn't even be the same. It wasn't like, oh, just turn it up to that amount. We'd have to sit there and go like, how crazy, how much, so we basically like automated all of the guitars to be the balance that they were supposed to be. I think on average, if I recall, that the crazy guitar layer was about 8 or 10 dB lower than the main one. But then when the moments would get crazy, that would shift to being like maybe even.
Yeah, 12 decibels.
And it varied. So we'd go through and he'd be like, here, out, out. And so I'd go through and I'd draw the automation. I go, is this right? And then I'd put it to the level that I thought made sense. And every part of that album, we went over that. Like every part of the album, it was like, is this the right blend of these sounds for this part? It wasn't like, all right, let me just turn on the thing. It wasn't that simple. It was like, each part needed to sound right. And it was like, sometimes it'd be an extra dB of the crazy layer or 2 dB. And sometimes it would just be tons of it to be really crazy. And so we went through literally every part, down to every bar, and he'd be like, oh, this section's going to be a real Punisher. Cause it'd be like, you can
hear that.
Yeah. And it totally comes across. Which is why like some people, I guess, would just be like, well, this is annoying, or like, dude, come on, dude. Like, it's like, no, I'm like, this is cool. I haven't done this. Like, I haven't done
the process of.
I've never done that. I've never done that process of doing guitars. I've just never done that. I don't think many people have done.
Has that translated into your other work?
It's definitely something that I think about, and it probably, to some degree, you can make guitars more dynamic by doing similar things to that. I haven't had anybody dial in a tone that's as crazy as that laser beam crazy tone. I mean, I haven't had anybody do that. But that doesn't mean that I won't. And that doesn't mean that I can't apply that in the future. So yeah, I mean, in this case, it only did me any good doing the follow-up record,
Well, I was going to ask about the follow-up.
Yeah.
Did that language develop, or did that same tone carry over, or how did
so we obviously had done, since we had made the other one, it was easier in terms of kind of the process to do the second one. But again, you say easier. It was like, it's just crazy no matter what. Like, it was more organized. I guess I wouldn't say it was easier, but like,
we
knew kind of more what we were trying to do, but we didn't use any of the same pedals. to do the things that the pedals did the first time. It wasn't like, all right, just bring in the Lone Wolf Audio this, and it wasn't, we didn't.
Did you still use the Fortin modded Marshalls?
So on this one, he brought both of them, the JMP and the 800, and we shot them out. And it was like immediately clear that the 800 was even better. And that doesn't mean that the JMP wasn't killer, but it was like,
there was the
800 just had it. Like it didn't take us more than 2 seconds to realize, like, all right, well, what we're trying to do is better served by this thing. And we were still like, even though we all kind of knew, we were like, well, what if it's a pedal thing? Like we gave it the best. We didn't just jump to that conclusion because it was on some better setting when we turned it on or something. We definitely were open to the idea of like, well, maybe the JMP would still be better if we just spent more time with it. But we spent that time and it was still like, nah, man, this is stupid. Like we got to use this Fortin modded.
Because it feels like the theme of this conversation when you, and from being around you, is like explore every option, go down the pipeline. Nothing's out of the question, even though it might be a ridiculous thing.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously don't want to waste time. Like every option would be ridiculous, but it's like if somebody says they want to hear an envelope filter, unless it's the world's stupidest idea or the guy who wrote the song is like, absolutely not, unless somebody's just like, that's not my, somebody has to take a real hard stance to just shut down an idea. If somebody has an idea and I got an envelope filter pedal lying around, or I can do it in the box real quick or whatever, it's like, we'll hear it. Maybe we don't like it, but maybe by hearing it, we get another idea. So it's like, you're just sort of, you have to be a little selective. It's like, you got to exercise a little bit of taste and just be like, well, we're not going to just try any old thing. Like these are the things that work. But if someone has an idea that they want to hear, you can't just immediately assume that it's just invalid because it sounds wacky. It's like that. It might be awesome. Maybe, an envelope filter into these pedals might not sound like what you think an envelope filter sounds like in your mind. You could use an auto, you think, oh, I'm going to use an auto wah. I'm going to sound like Dave Navarro, or something. It's like, well, that's not what an auto wah sounds like into a grimy fuzz pedal. It's like, so that's the nature of pedals. And that's like, I grew up in the 90s and pedals were the most important thing to 12 and 13 and 14 and 15.
Yeah.
They were like they were their whole point. Like you could do anything if you had a good phaser or a good flanger, and then you were cool. And that's what I spent all my time and money on was pedals. Like me and Chris would go to downtown Portland on the weekends and like just Dad would take us down there and we would just go to all the music stores we could to try all the pedals.
Because like, I feel like the theme nowadays is the exact opposite of what you're talking about. Yeah. I feel like people grab, what's this guy's preset? What's this guy's chain? Yeah. And then they'll plug in, they'll pick up their guitar. Yeah. It's not.
No, it's the opposite of that. And again, if you don't have any ideas, I mean, again, it wasn't like every guitar player I knew was pedal crazy. So it's like some guys just wanted to plug in and play. Some guys are just songwriters. They just want to sit there and play and they just need a good, inspiring sound. So like there's room for all that stuff. There's room for people to have just plug and play. Plug and play. You capture the moment. If you have plug and play set up and you write a riff and you already got a good sound, you can capture it in the moment. So there's something to be said for having presets and automation and all that. But you can also have presets of shit that's real wacky. So it's like, yeah, I make presets of things I do all the time. The effects are crazy. Anytime I do any cool effect on any record, I save it in case they want it redone or in case I want to use it later. So like, I'll be sitting here and somebody will be like, oh, can we get some kind of this slapback? And my brain goes, you made a slapback setting in Echo Boy for this band. And it was a little cool and different. And so I go pull up the preset and they're like, dude, that rules. And you're like, so it's a totally different style of band. It's a totally different application. And it's a very creative sound. It's not like, yep, this is the slapback sound that comes under the slapback preset. But like the idea of having presets for things and having kind of, that isn't the bad idea. The bad idea is stifling creativity when creativity is warranted.